Yo, welcome back to The Last of Us Surviving the Super Apocalypse, a full-length book about The Last of Us. This book is available for free at keithcourage.com. Feel free to go download a copy in one of many delightful formats. As for this audio version, which is being released at a painfully slow pace, we're halfway through Bill's town. We've met up with Bill. We're on our way to go get a battery so we can get a car going so Joel and Ellie can get the fuck out of Boston. Following Bill. Bill leads us through some abandoned buildings. If you stray from the main path, Joel will say, "I'm gonna take a look in here." Bill says, "Go ahead. Ain't anything in there that I need." I love how they took the time to normalize my video game behavior. Of course I'm going to go check all the rooms. Even playing item lists, there's still things to find. One is a note that Bill left for himself about a group of hunters that are getting too close to his town. Hunters, i.e. human raiders, would be a serious problem for Bill. For them, this town would be a sweet take. If they could kill just this one guy, they'd get all the food and weapons he's been hoarding. According to the manifest we found earlier, Bill is trading whole cases of booze to Tess. I bet he's got all kinds of shit squirreled away. Ludonarrative harmony. I like how The Last of Us makes at least a token effort to have the game items make some kind of sense. A rag and alcohol makes a health kit, which Joel wraps on himself to ease the pain of his grazes. Even weird stuff like listen mode, or Joel upgrading his inborn abilities with pills, are at least on the vaguest edge of some kind of pseudo-logic. Despite its interest in realism, The Last of Us is still unabashedly gamey. It's about item collecting, and resource management, and reflexes, and shooting people in the face. Those old-school gamified elements are nice, because sometimes I find myself drifting so far down the art game hole that I can barely see sunlight. That The Last of Us can wear its gaminess on its sleeve, yet still manage to tie together its gameplay, story, and overall situation into such an artful package, it's practically a miracle, man. This game really does seem like one in a million. Rags. On the other hand, I gotta admit that when you're low on rags, The Last of Us's gaminess can get very annoying. The artificial scarcity can be brutal. It's a rag. When it's a life or death situation, I'll find some fucking rags. I'll use my own pants. It's no time for fancy Joel to hold out until he can find his very favorite, perfect kind of rag. It has to be the same as the curtains I had as a kid, or I won't let it touch my skin. Okay, Joel. You do know that you're bleeding, right, you crazy old rag-hating bastard? Still with Bill. One of the houses we're walking through has a framed picture of a mime. I've got no explanation for that. Since I've been trying to pay more attention to the little details, I've started noticing a lot more repeated assets. Finding 3 copies of that Starting a Small Business book in Joel's house was no accident. But it took me 4 playthroughs and a decision to write a whole book before I started noticing these things, so it's clearly no big deal. Bill has a trapped infected he hasn't dealt with, so he walks over and hacks its head off, saying, "I was meaning to take care of that." His level of comfort with the infected is pretty crazy. I guess this is all he does all day. Scavenge and deal with the infected. These creatures must have taken on a level of unreality for him. They're like a game, like that chessboard back at the bar. His town is just a board, and these monsters are just the pieces. I head over to inspect the bloody corpse Bill left, and a damn butterfly flies by. That kind of sums up the visual style of this game. Brutal violence against a backdrop of nature reclaiming the planet. Gross and beautiful. Ellie asks Bill why he doesn't fix up any of the old cars that are lying around, and he explains how super fucked they are. He also says the military are the only ones making new car batteries. It's nice to hear that the military is still producing things. Maybe the human race won't be fucked in the long term. I know the title The Last of Us implies that because of Joel's actions, this is going to be the last generation of people that there are ever going to be, but I still like to think that they might scrape by, even without the mythical serum from Ellie's brain. Some infected attack us in a parking lot and kill us immediately. After a couple of deaths, I notice that if I creep ahead, the infected are all right there, waiting. I like that they don't just spawn out of nowhere, or suddenly clamber over a fence. They were there all along. The characters just didn't notice them as they were chatting away. Watching the infected while they stand still, with Bill and Ellie still talking, is so creepy. The two female runners are wearing the same clothes, and that feels a little video gamey. They seem like two enemy assets placed at this point on the map. Maybe they were in a jogging team. I never thought of that. Maybe they all dress the same to promote solidarity. You know, if we're going to get up at 5 a.m. and jog, then we'll all be part of Team Jogging Moms. Jog Moms. When they start running toward me, it feels frightening. I don't know why. If they get me, I can just start again. There's no real danger here, but it feels like there is. This is another reason I like playing games on hard, because I love this feeling. If my primal instincts aren't going off in some capacity, games get boring real fast. There are 2 clickers in this group, and I'm hoping that Bill can take care of them. Again, it reminds me of that chess game on Bill's table. Don't go near the clickers, don't go near 2 or more runners at once. Try to maneuver all the pieces until you can capture them one at a time. There are times when the combat animations really go to hell. Trying to fight on stairs is always a disaster. But it's amazing how often it works and how often everything looks great. I break combat to run away, but I'm not fast enough and I get grabbed from behind. I decide to restart the encounter, but just before I pause the game, Bill comes up, swinging his machete to help me. That moment gets frozen in time, and it really looks like a couple of people trying to fight off a crazed monster. It must be moments like this that inspired the inclusion of photo mode in the PS4 version. Violence. I guess I'd say I'm pretty desensitized to violence. When our family got our first internet connection, it didn't take long for my brother and I to start looking up crime scene photos. Our connection was slow, so the images would tick down very gradually. We'd watch Suicide Victim, Shotgun, with our brows furrowed until the grisly image slowly became decipherable. Even my mom joined us for a bit. My mom, I don't know, she's kind of into serial killers and shit. It's kind of weird. Anyway, I remember a photo where a guy had somehow gotten his head run over in a parking lot, and we all agreed that it looked like a broken watermelon. Gross, but fascinating. It was a nice family moment. So maybe it's not surprising that the violence in most video games doesn't bother me. But even though it doesn't bother me, I'm not always on board with video game violence. Sometimes it's silly, like the violence in BioShock Infinite, which seemed extremely incongruous. It felt like gore was included to fulfill some half-formed notion of what's expected in a mature video game. It was mostly blood for blood's sake. On the creepy and awful side, some of the violence against women in games really unnerves me. In God of War 3, Kratos crushes a crying woman to death just so he can prop open a giant door for a few moments. Do you remember that? I remember there was this big story about the game after that, God of War Absolution or something it was called. No, that was Hitman. What was that dumb God of War game called? Anyway, it was this thing where you kill like a harpy girl and you get a trophy called Bros Before Hoes, and that was making the circles of the news cycle. Oh, it's so offensive, it's so misogynist. That's just stupid. That's not offensive. Meanwhile, God of War 3, legitimately disturbing. It's like one of the like concubines of some god, essentially a completely innocent person. And she's in her little concubine outfit with her tits out, and Kratos is just kicking her around the level while she's crying and begging for her life. And then he just like puts her in this big gear to hold open a door. And then you hear her like get crushed, and if you go back around later you can see her gross mangled body. That's one of the most crazily misogynistic nonsense things I have ever seen, and no one fucking said anything about it. Like, that's where I learned two things: that the God of War team, despite being run by a woman at the time, can fuck off, because that's fucked up. Like, it's not like you're fighting a god. If it's a god, okay, fine. But it's just a complete innocent person, and like, fuck you. I'm supposed to... Because you know the way they were intending it was like, oh, Kratos, he's so badass. Like, oh, he's a bad guy, but he's kind of cool too, right? You think this is kind of cool. That's fucking fucked up and gross and ridiculous. But nobody even brought that up. Instead, they brought up this stupid bullshit with the harpy. Who gives a shit? And of course, the guy ranting to himself while he stands alone on a beach is the true truth teller of society, as it has always been and as it forever shall be. Let's get back on book, shall we? In Saints Row 2, your character throws a friendly bartender into a hail of gunfire for no particular reason, and the game just trucks along like nothing happened. In exploitation films, at least the violence is framed in the context of a wrong that needs to be righted. In those two gaming examples, the developers seem to want me to think, this is cool. I'm playing a cool game. Scenes like that really make me feel ashamed of video games. Now that I've gotten all judgmental about these bad people, who should in fact feel bad about themselves and the reprehensible scenes they've helped create, let's talk about when violence seems appropriate. As an example, let's use... I don't know, let's say, you know what, I guess we'll go with The Last of Us. In The Last of Us, the violence is crazy. It's dirty and messy and ugly, but I'd argue that it's not glorified. Well, it is a bit, but not to the extent that it is in other games. The Last of Us violence is not fun violence. It's cringe violence. You wince, you feel taken aback. Incredibly, the game might feel more exploitative if it were less violent. That's a tough argument to make, that a violent game is a commentary on the horrific nature of violence, rather than a fun glorification of same. But The Last of Us comes much closer to accomplishing that balance than most other games. Softening its violence might trivialize the situation. It could undermine the brutality of what these characters are doing to each other. The Last of Us never lets the player forget that the violence in this world is an awful thing. It is a terrible price these people are paying in order to survive. It's not some fun thing that they're doing for our enjoyment. Of course, the more I play, the less I feel that way. I am getting desensitized. But the fact that I wasn't desensitized from the first moment is an accomplishment. And with The Last of Us, I still sometimes have those wincing moments. Sometimes, the reality of who Joel is and of what he's doing is impossible to ignore. In other games, I'd just dismiss the character's actions as a function of the gameplay. He's not really doing these things, this is just the gameplay part. He has to kill all these people, or there would be no game. Whereas in The Last of Us, it feels like Joel is doing these things. The violence is acknowledged, and the storyline sees it through. It seems like the violence in The Last of Us is earned, rather than being exploitative. Mostly. I mean, I still feel good when I get a headshot on some asshole who's been fucking with me. It is a video game, after all, and not some mega magic super miracle. Infected ambush. Back to the parking lot battle with the infected. The fluidity of watching Joel run, then clamber up onto an old van, looks amazing. The Uncharted games were wonderful for this also. The combat is so fluid. You don't sit still and play whack-a-mole from behind cover. You move. I decide to start letting the fights play out rather than restarting as soon as I take damage. I want to see the interplay between me, Bill, and Ellie. It really is great to watch. There are a ton of surprising, very real-seeming moments between us. At one point, I get surrounded by infected and start cowering. Okay, gotta go fix that, Keith. Go edit that. It says, and started cowering. Go find that and fix it. At one point, I get surrounded by infected and start cowering. I forgot about that mechanic. Doesn't happen very often. Bill whacks a runner with his machete, and I finish her off with my fists of steel. It's almost weird how fluid that seems. It's like real teamwork. How did Naughty Dog manage this? Who are the critics who say that the combat mechanics in this game are lacking? What the heck other games are they playing? Admittedly, when something doesn't work, I just ignore it. But in most games, nothing works, ever. Nothing really feels like a down and dirty, you and me, neck and neck struggle. Fights in other games don't feel dirty and messy, they just feel like video game fights. Maybe that's what some people didn't like? There's definitely a type of gamer who doesn't want to struggle, and who only wants games to be power fantasies. But this game, especially the first time through, definitely makes you struggle. There's a lot of trading blows and not a lot of clean victories. There's one death takedown where an infected is on your chest and just starts crazily beating on your corpse. Man, that one always freaks me out. This fight is really hard. It's starting to exhaust me a bit. Maybe I should allow myself to take some damage and stop trying to do every fight perfectly. But this demoralizing feeling does mirror my first playthrough. The first time, I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just trying to get through each battle by any means necessary. So upping the difficulty ante puts me back in a similar mindset. Fair amount of redundancy in this book. I'm sure I've said that, easily 10 times already. You know, this difficult playthrough reminds me very much of my first playthrough, which was difficult. Let's see how many more times I say that before the end of this book. 5 more times minimum, I'm guessing. That first playthrough was a bit too stressful to really be fun, and some reviews of the game were mixed for that. Oh, see, that's why I brought it up. I brought it up because now I'm going to talk about it. Always second-guessing yourself, Keith. Always doubting yourself. Always quick to call your past self a shit writer, when really your past self is only a moderately inelegant writer, with periods of shit. Alright. That first playthrough was a bit too stressful to really be fun, and some reviews of the game were mixed for that reason. But, being a fan of story and gameplay marriages as I am, I really appreciated it. The game's relentless combat sometimes made me feel horrible, but as I've said, that sense of exhaustion within a situation... You know what, just skip this whole paragraph. Who gives a shit about that? Fuck that. Maybe I won't be able to finish this fight today. I might have to sleep on it. It really feels rough. It feels like a goddamn slog. But that's what Joel's life is. Using games to simulate a lack of power rather than the reverse, that's a cool fucking thing. Ellie takes down a clicker with a brick, and he didn't seem to be getting back up, though I died too quickly to be sure. What the fuck was that? Did Ellie just kill a clicker with a brick? I keep at it, and it only takes a few more tries before I finally make it through. Whew! If Ellie stuns a clicker with a brick... Cut that whew, that's stupid. If Ellie stuns a clicker with a brick, I wonder if I could then get some punches in. I was too scared to try it, so I had to wait for Bill to finally take out the last clicker himself. Sorry I wasn't more help there, Bill. Billy. Old Billiam. Joel's arms are really strong, by the way. I was rushing to rescue Bill, stopped to beat the shit out of a runner on the way, and without breaking stride or swing, moved right onto Bill's attacker. It was like swinging your arms in a windmill and just running into a fight. Post-battle talk. During our post-fight banter, Bill says the infected are predictable, and it's the normal people that scare him. He then mentions that Joel, of all people, should know about that. Ellie asks, what does that mean? There's another case where I wrote a bunch of stuff in all caps, but rather than yell, let's go the other way. Let's go quiet storm. It means Joel was a no-good murdering hunter. He's a murderer. A murderer. It is kind of funny that Joel's past is such a distinct plot point, when in other games I've murdered hundreds without anyone making a particular point of it. I know this is taking things a little far, but in some ways, this game closes the book on video games. If you don't want ludonarrative dissonance between your gameplay and your story, then you have to tell the story of a murderer. There's really no other choice when your game is about murder. Man, this book is getting pretty long, huh? And we've barely made it out of Boston. Maybe this book itself will become a metaphor for Joel's story. A seemingly endless trudge through the dregs of humanity with nothing but a troubling finale as a reward. Thanks for reading this, by the way. I think more books should say thank you right in the middle. So reader, whoever you may be, you're cool by me. Alright, coolness confirmed. Let's carry on. Bill's hideout. At Bill's hideout, Joel asks if a simple locked gate is enough defense. Bill says they don't have a key. I guess he's right. A gate would probably be enough to stop the infected. Of course, if a group of humans were to get this far, no gate is going to stop them. Given that, I reckon there's no sense trying to defend against the impossible. At that point, trying to escape would probably be Bill's only option. So, sure, locked gate. Why not? Good enough. Humankind is dangerous. You know, that's something I sort of trained myself to do, is to pronounce words like humankind with the hu. Because, I don't know, half of my family is French. I never used to pronounce that. I just say humankind. And people kept pointing it out, like, it's not humankind, it's humankind. But I still feel silly saying it, like it's such an unnecessary extra sound, and it's just so much work to say humankind. Like, what? Anyway, I'm doing that for you, whoever you are out there, whoever judgmental dickbag is listening. Humankind. Humankind. You're welcome. Humankind is dangerous. Even in such a pathetic state, at the very end of their existence, human beings are still the most dangerous creatures on the planet. One thing that makes the Last of Us apocalypse so compelling to me is that humans were the only animals affected. It's not a nuclear apocalypse that destroyed everything like Fallout. It's not a mysterious and brutal metaphor affliction like The Road. This apocalypse actually benefited the other creatures on the planet by getting us and our destructive behavior out of the picture. I'm a fan of the human race. Even if we destroyed everything on Earth and were left clinging to a ruined rock, I'd say it was worth it, just for something as interesting as us to have existed. But to an outside observer, we probably look like some world-devouring bacteria. Aliens would probably view us piteously as a bizarre cruelty of evolution, a bacteria whose each individual unit knows that it's gonna die. What a weird thing. But as a human being myself, you know, yeah, fuck you, I'm saying it. As a human being, I don't need to pronounce your H's. Go drink your sweet tea, you southern fucks. But as a human being myself, I think we're pretty great. I kinda can't help it, and that species-specific zealotry makes me understand why, if the Earth had a will, it would surely be trying to shake us off. If there were really such a thing as balance in nature, we have clearly upset it. So as villains go, this is a great apocalypse. This is an apocalypse we can really take personally. This apocalypse says that humankind has gotta go, but everyone else can stay. And we say, dude, fuck that. If only we could stop killing each other. But hey, nobody said bacteria was smart. Arming for adventure. Bill takes us into one of his hideouts, which used to be a church. Wait, did he just give me a shotgun? Man, all this time I was so worried about how I was going to deal with that bloater in the school gym, but this game just keeps forcing guns on me. 11 bullets, 6 shotgun shells, and a Molotov? Bloater, you are fucking dead. Bill shows me a nail bomb, and the game won't let me leave Bill's basement until I pick it up. Christ, I'm getting spoiled. The nail bombs definitely make no sense. They'd need some kind of electronics to explode due to enemy proximity, and some super electronics to know not to explode when it's Joel who's nearby. I also don't think I'd keep one of those in my backpack, even with their supernatural AI. It's along the lines of the homemade flamethrower. There's survivalism, and there's being an IED-carrying maniac. There's another bow upstairs. This must be baffling for a game designer. Alright, I can see how a player might miss that first bow. And the second one, I don't know, maybe their phone rang right as they got to it. But the third one is right there. Pick it up! Pick up the fucking bow, you moron! That's my impersonation of a Naughty Dog employee. But instead, I walk right by. This is the first time that I didn't steal the pills from Bill's room. So this version of Joel is arguably a mildly better person. Very mildly. Hey, is that gay porn that's laying on top of Bill's TV? Survey says yes. The super apocalypse. Confirmed insane. I've been writing this book in a bit of a vacuum. I mainly discuss it with my friends, and they're used to seeing me take on bizarre gaming handicaps. Want to get better with the whip and Spelunky? Just refuse to pick up the shotgun. Want to learn how to whip arrows out of the air? Make a rule that you have to air whip every arrow trap you find. Set higher and higher bars, and you'll rise up to meet them. If only I were so brave in real life. But since my gaming habits have become a constant process of self-flagellation, it was hard to tell if the Super Apocalypse playthrough was even that cool of a thing. Maybe I'm kidding myself about how bizarre or difficult this is. But I met some new people during a brainstorming meeting for a Toronto-based video game documentary. We were all at a bar talking about what other projects we were working on. I told them about this book and how I played through The Last of Us without picking up any items. One of the guys turned toward me and said, "You did what?" That made me laugh and confirmed that the Super Apocalypse playthrough is indeed absurd. Every playthrough seems easy once it's been done, so I was glad to have the ridiculousness of this project confirmed. Dumbest guy to ever play The Last of Us? Possibly me. I'm at least in the running. On my deathbed, I can tell the nurses about what I accomplished in life. Back in the day, I played this one video game so incorrectly. It was the wrongest anyone had ever played it. Is that why you have no grandchildren to be at your bedside, Mr. McNally? Yes, it is. Yes. That's the sound of me dying. That doesn't make me feel very good. The cemetery. That's the greatest way to get yourself back on track in any project. Just declare something into the air. We leave the hideout, creeping into a cemetery full of clickers. I read on the wiki that the clickers all appear to be female, and judging by these, that might be true, but I still can't get a close look at them without getting my face eaten off. Tech storytelling. It's interesting how choices made for technological reasons can have story implications. If all of the clickers are female, what does that mean about the infection? When asked why there were no infected children, Neil Druckmann said there was no time to implement them, insinuating that there should be. But there aren't, so in the final reality presented by The Last of Us, it could be inferred that children can't survive being infected. I think having to work within technological guidelines is part of what makes storytelling in video games so interesting. It's often said that having limits can improve art, and there are no limits harder than tech limits. Limits in a book are largely self-imposed, and since the rise of computer graphics, movies have almost no limits, and that lack of constraint has not necessarily made movies better. But what medium besides video games could make something like Pac-Man? Pac-Man was not a work of minimalism. It wasn't ironic, it wasn't a reference, it wasn't a throwback. Pac-Man was straining to be as great as it could be, given the technological restraints of the time. It ended up being weird as shit, and that weirdness took over the world. In a less limited environment, there's no way a work like Pac-Man could have been created. I can't think of another medium that unabashedly strives the way that video games do. We would do more than this if we could, but we can't, and what we make is somehow greater for it. The constraints on The Last of Us are very different, but they still have a great effect on the final product. I can only imagine the number of changes and compromises that had to be made during development. The struggle to keep the gameplay and storyline integrated, despite having to make changes to accommodate the PS3, must have been brutal. But somehow, it all worked out. Cemetery Death Party. Now, back to survival concerns. There is no good way to get through this cemetery. It's filled with 4 or 5 clickers in a very small space. Bill just gave me a fully loaded shotgun, so it's not unreasonable to expect me to blow their heads off. But I shan't. I try sneaking, but halfway through the clickers always seem to notice me. So instead, I run. After a couple of tries, I manage to run all the way to the end of the section, but there's no icon to manipulate the door. It must be because the clickers are all freaking out. I'm meant to take care of them. So I stand there, waiting to die. But I don't die. The clickers don't seem able to move into the little alcove where the door is. Could Bill kill all of these clickers? Seems unlikely, especially since he's just standing there like an idiot. After a few moments, the clickers calm down and wander away. Then the door icon pops up. I've somehow done it again. I fudged through another section with no bullets, taking no damage. It's fucking crazy how this keeps working out. Soon after, an infected grabs me, and Ellie pulls it off before I take any damage. Nice one, Ellie. But then another one kills me, and we go all the way back to the start of the cemetery. What the shit? The weird glitch with the cemetery door doesn't work a second time. Instead, I hide on some dead-end stairs across from the exit door and wait. Miraculously, the clickers don't find me. They wander off, we head through the door, and this time the game checkpoints us on the other side. The Suburbs. We start crawling through the suburbs, weaving through people's backyards. It feels fucking creepy. Bill comes running around a corner and my heart jumps into my throat. Jesus, Bill, be fucking cool. I get jumped and killed, and when the game reloads, the 2 infected at the start of the suburbs stay dead. That's weird, but I'll take it. Settle down. I noticed that the little wrench icon has appeared at some point, which means I can craft something. Shut up! Turns out when I picked up that nail bomb, I also got the materials to make a second nail bomb. The Last of Us has really got my back. This game is drowning me in items. I've got like 4 things now. Bill's footsteps really are ridiculously loud. Giving companions such audible footfalls was a very strange choice. Say, this house looks an awful lot like Clementine's house from The Walking Dead. That can't be an accident, right? Zombie Game Brotherhood. I like it. The press select to craft message comes up again. For God's sake, I'm hours deep on survival difficulty, I even crafted something earlier, just so you'd shut up about crafting. I fucking know how to craft. You're not my mom, Last of Us. Another all-caps hilarity fest. You're not my mom, and I know you blew Uncle Reg. He fucking told me. I didn't want to hear about that. I was just trying to get a ride downtown. Oh, God, our family. What happened? So funny. So anyway, I craft another nail bomb. Remember how the original BioShock had an adaptive training system to help teach players about the game? Yet 10 hours in, it was still telling me which button would make me duck. I guess I didn't duck often enough to cause the training system to adapt. I feel like I did, but whatever. You're not my dad, adaptive training system. Yeah, that thing did not work at all. Adaptive my fucking dick. Didn't adapt to shit. Didn't fucking adapt to nothing. The fight outside the school is pretty tough. 2 big waves of infected attack with no checkpoint. I'm tempted to relax and just let them dish out a little damage on me. But if I take a little damage here and a little damage during the next fight, then the next thing you know, I'm fucking dead. Dead like Uncle Reg if I ever see him again, which was a dumb callback to the dumb joke I made earlier. Besides, I saw those guys on YouTube do their no damage runs. They were walking arsenals of death, but if they can do it, surely I can do it as well, even with only my fists. As usual, the best strategy turns out to be running. I run all around like a crazy running fool until I catch a stray infected who doesn't have any of his friends around. Then I punch that guy good. Rinse and repeat. I rinse and repeat many times. I cane and rinse, if you will. School buses. There are a ton of school buses in this parking lot. They have banners on them that read Group 1, Springfield, Group 3, Hartford, and Group 4, Boston. I guess all these groups came here for a basketball tournament or something. They must have been away from home when the outbreak hit. That's a shame. And that's why you should never play sports. I never thought to question why there are so many school buses in this area. From a level design standpoint, it's clearly so that a bunch of runners can appear out of nowhere. But it's cool that when someone decides to look for an answer, they can find it. Basketball tournament. Genius. I'm curious which city Group 2 was from. Was I really curious? Apparently I was. I'm curious which city Group 2 was from, but I can't find any of their buses. What I do find, however, is a discarded giraffe toy. Whoa, spoiler alert. Apparently, actually, those giraffe toys are all through the game. I just missed the earlier ones. After clearing out the infected, Joel boosts Ellie up onto one of the buses in what I think is the first Joel boosting up Ellie scene. Then more infected arrive, and we get chased into the school. Turns out the battery we came here to get is missing, and everyone freaks out a little. Then we're chased deeper into the school, barricading the door behind us. The school. Ah, the school. God damn it. This is one of the sections that would flit most often through my mind when I was thinking about trying to do this run. I really don't know how I'm going to do this. This first hallway, incidentally, is where I first realized the game has a dynamic supply system. If I had low health, Ellie would always give me a health pack here. Apparently she just finds it laying around, or maybe had it tucked away for a rainy day. Regenerating health. When the mechanic of regenerating health first started gaining popularity, I was a fan. When any video game resource is finite, I compulsively hoard it. But if there's just a cooldown period before an ability recharges, then I'll use it. Games are more fun when you use your abilities, rather than saving them up for a big fight that may never come. Regenerating health made me realize that a character's health bar is a similar resource. When you rely on health pickups, you have to be careful all the time. Taking a chance now might cause you to wedge yourself into a more dire situation later. With regenerating health, you're free to try bolder strategies. As long as you scrape through that specific encounter with just a sliver of life, there's no long-term penalty for trying something crazy. I love being free to do crazy shit in games. I don't like being hemmed behind cover, carefully firing at enemies. That's totally mind-numbing to me. I want to run around, trying to get the drop on enemies and having to deal with the moment-to-moment repercussions of my ill-advised maneuvers. Traditional health bars don't support that style of playing. You'll just get gradually ground down until you have no choice but to stay behind cover, carefully firing at enemies. However, I heard someone mention that the downside to regenerating health is that it reduces the scope of encounters. Regenerating health boils a game down into a series of 20-second encounters, after which you're healed. On the other hand, the scarcity of health packs can create greater tension, stretching the stress of an encounter out over 3 or 4 minutes. I think it was Jonathan Blow who said that. And it's a good point, one that I hadn't considered. The Last of Us does a pretty nice job of incorporating both styles. On the surface, the game has a traditional health bar with restorative items. The reason I never crafted a Molotov during my earlier playthroughs was because I was so terrified of running out of health. There seemed to be no safety net down there. And as I've mentioned many times, on my first playthrough, The Last of Us seemed like one brutal grind of getting my ass kicked over and over. But on later playthroughs, I've realized how much the game is actually looking after me. Characters will coyly give me all kinds of stuff, but without it being too obvious. Ultimately, The Last of Us has all the hallmarks of a modern game, in the sense that it doesn't want a player to get too stuck or get too lost. As long as you put in the time, The Last of Us wants you to see its ending. But the game has still found a way to give the player that old-school health bar scare. It gives the player resource management stress, which is one of the things that made old games so exciting. But if that stress reaches a breaking point, one of the under-the-hood systems will find a way to help you. It took a while for me to recognize that balance, but I became really impressed with how The Last of Us slyly uses both methods of health management. Approaching the gym. You know that animation where Joel and Ellie hide together and Joel's arm covers Ellie protectively? That can also happen with Joel and Bill. Don't worry, Bill. I got you, man. This run-up to the bloater is goddamn insane. To do it two-fisted involves a lot of letting Bill kill people and takes a lot of luck. I have to try over and over a sickening amount of times before I eventually manage to get through with only a little damage taken. I know I could do it damage-free, but this overall playthrough has already gone 1,000 times better than I expected it to. I thought I'd be on the ragged edge all the time, just praying that my partner would give me one of those out-of-the-blue health packs. So I'm willing to fight the bloater with a little damage. Fuck it. That section really was totally inappropriate to try to tackle with only fists. I'm just gonna count my blessings that it's over. It took so long that I was really starting to question this whole endeavor. It was like trying to make a sandwich with your elbows, even though you have hands. Instead of feeling accomplished by achieving a weird thing, the total pointlessness of this playthrough really began to loom large. But I'm gonna blow up that bloater good. I had a brief crisis of faith, but this is gonna rejuvenate me. Time to finally pull out this arsenal that's been burning a hole in my backpack. I actually think it's kind of interesting looking back at that section. Like, I really did not get into details at all of how tough that school section was to get to the gym. And I think that's the greatest sign of all, that it was like, I should have just kept a counter at least of like how many times I had to restart that encounter. But yeah, it was like so hard and so demoralizing and such a grind that I just didn't write about it at all. It was like too painful to even get into the specifics. But man, I remember just because there's so many clickers and there's so little room to maneuver. And yeah, just trying to duck through the hallways and go into the fucking classroom and draw people out, and just trying so many different strategies of how can I alert this guy but not this guy, and how can I get fucking Bill to kill one of these fucks. And Then there's the final hallway at the end. Just a nightmare. Damn it. Fuck. Shit. God damn it. That part was hard. The gym. After the gauntlet of the school corridors, we barricade ourselves in the school gym. But we've locked ourselves in with the largest of all the infected, the bloater. Fuck. It's actually a bit of a dorky moment when the bloater first kicks open the equipment room door. Bill should yell, "Boss fight!" It's a lot more telegraphed than any of the earlier battles. If clickers are female, then I guess bloaters must be too? She looks so tough, so self-assured, just spoiling for a battle. It might make sense for her to be a bit more lurchy and disoriented. Judging by the spore-filled room she came out of, she's never been outside of the equipment closet before. The sweet sound of human voices must have called her to action. I'd like to point out at this juncture that I never claimed this book was well written. Did I? I don't think I did. I certainly didn't mean to, if I did. I take some fairly direct hits from spore bombs, and they don't seem to do any damage on impact. It's only the residual cloud that hurts. For the sake of science, I try to carefully punch the bloater. Nope. Dang it, I was using that head. See, that's a joke about the fact that bloaters tear your fucking head in half when they kill you. Well, I had to try it. I was hoping that I could maybe pop her in the back of the head, just once real quick, and dash away. But my jaw got torn off. A message pops up that says, "Punching a clicker is ineffective. Try a melee weapon." Can you smack a bloater with a 2x4? I don't know how I'd get all the way here with a melee weapon, but I assume that that wouldn't work either. My worries about how I would manage to kill this bloater were unnecessary, because it goes down real easy. A Molotov sets it on fire, and while it's weakened, a nail bomb takes it down. Boom. Fuck you, bloater. Maybe Bill could have slowly shot the thing to death, but I think a bloater deserves the honor of being blown up whilst on fire. Taking out the remaining stragglers is pretty weird. I run circles around the gym at a pace a little too fast for a normal person, with no sign of slowing or getting tired. It's like a fucked up racing game where I occasionally slug a zombie in the face as I race by. But hey, if it works, it works. Frank's house. We clamber out of the gym and head into a nearby house where we find Bill's old partner, Frank. Or we find Frank's corpse hanging in the living room. We also discover that the car battery was missing because Frank had grabbed it. Getting the battery back to his house by himself is pretty impressive. Granted, he took a couple bites while doing it. Facial expressions. During one of my later, more casual playthroughs, I happened to have the sound turned down during this section. I focused more on the characters' facial expressions, and man, the Naughty Dog animators really nailed that stuff. Joel and Bill are arguing, then Bill sees Frank. Bill's eyes show a lot of hurt, but Joel is still pissed. Then Joel softens, gesturing toward Frank as he says, "I reckon he didn't want to turn." It's just so good. So goddamn good. Frank's note. Frank left a note which basically says that dying alone is better than trying to live with Bill. It's weird that for full trophy completion, you have to give Frank's mean note to Bill so that you can pick it up again in its crumpled state. It's far kinder not to let Bill know how much Frank hated him, and I got nothing against Bill, so I keep the note to myself. When Bill describes Frank as someone he had to look after, it's partially because Bill's a jerk, and partially an accurate description. Bill is the survivalist, where Frank is clearly not. Frank is a smaller guy who wears Hawaiian shirts. He definitely wasn't shoring up the perimeter and maintaining traps. This house of his doesn't even have boarded up windows. I am not really sure how he intended to survive on his own. I guess he was considering driving away, but what then? I think it must have been this Frank who was trying to get into the Boston QZ. He'd be under military rule, but at least there would be a pretense that someone was looking after him. Faces. I really like the look of the faces in this game, particularly the older characters like Joel and Bill. They're a mix of realistic and stylized, which kind of ends up looking like an oil painting. The characters' eyes also look much better in The Last of Us than they did in Uncharted 2 or even Uncharted 3. Bill's eyes are a bit bloodshot and a bit watery. When I was a kid, I never dreamed I'd be able to learn about a video game character by the small details of his eyes. It's crazy. Preparing to leave. According to Bill, the military convoy crashed a few months ago, so Frank had to be alive at that point. His corpse looks like he must have died very soon after. Perhaps if you die before the cordyceps can take hold, it has a mummifying effect on your body. There's a lot of stuff in this house. 8 shotgun shells, a reinforced bat, pills, various tiny gears, and this is on the ultra scant survivor mode. Normal mode must be a fucking cornucopia. Normal mode really shouldn't even exist. Hard mode should be normal, and normal should be easy. Easy should be, get the fuck out of here! Video games don't have to be for everyone! The gameplay in The Last of Us has strong narrative implications. I must reiterate, again, that the mechanical challenge of the game is very important to the story being told. Really, must I? Must I reiterate that again? Hey Joel, there are a bunch of shotgun shells here by the door, and a spiked bat in the kitchen. You might want to grab those. No, Bill, I'm all right. You sure? Well, then I'm gonna take them. No, Bill, you won't. No one's taken anything. It's the super apocalypse. Those items ain't even there. What? Man, you're goddamn crazy fuck. I sure can't wait till you get the fuck out of my life. I respect that opinion. And additionally, Bill, let's kiss. That was some spontaneous fan fiction. Ellie takes the wheel of Frank's truck, and we never find out where she learned to drive. Joel tells Ellie she's doing a good job before he and Bill start pushing. The wheels in Joel's head are turning. Tess is dead, and she ain't coming back. Joel has had some experience with moving on, and that's what's happening. They're taking this truck, driving it far away from Boston, and whatever happened in Boston doesn't matter anymore. Pushing Frank's truck. When Joel gets into position to give the truck a push, his watch clips into his wrist, which looks painful. Joel and Bill are trying to push the truck when, holy shit, infected! I let Bill kill the clickers and realized that I still haven't used any of my bullets. I thought I'd need them all for that bloater, but now the bloater's dead. I don't know what I'll need them for. Maybe nothing. The second bloater is the obvious problem, but that's during Ellie's section, and Joel's items don't carry over, so I might be able to carry these 11 bullets and 6 shells all the way to the end of the game. If I wanted to be extra hardcore, I could fire them into the air right now. But I better hang on to them, just in case there's some situation that I'm not thinking of. I take a graze while defending the truck, but I assume my health bar will refill once I get to Pittsburgh. So I let it slide. We're cool, zombie. Just let me kill you real quick. The Last of Us does become a much more basic game when you don't use weapons. There is a huge amount of punching and choking. It's a good way to bear down on the game and focus on it in a new way, but I do miss shooting motherfuckers. We escape the infected, get the truck started, and Joel tells Ellie to keep the engine running. She gives him a trucker-worthy thumbs up. Ellie's a pretty cool cat. Joel apologizes to Bill about Frank, but still doesn't tell him that Tess is dead. I think that's pretty fucked up. It's not the most fucked up thing Joel's ever done, or will do in the future. But when Bill's waiting for Tess to show up and she never does, that'll be the final cherry on top of Bill's dealings with nutcase fucking Joel. It really is amazing how much leeway we give Joel just because he's the main character. If you look at this game from anyone else's perspective, dealing with Psycho Joel must be a goddamn nightmare. Or at the very least, a pain in the ass. Hey, you want to invite Joel to board game night? Which Joel? Psycho Joel? No, I fucking don't. That dude's fucking psycho. That's why they call him Psycho Joel. They don't call him board game Joel. All right, Christ, I was just asking. Calm the fuck down. That's another piece of short fan fiction that I wrote entitled Board Game Night. Man, I hope nobody steals that. I knew I shouldn't have put my writing on the internet. Oh, whoa. Woe and bother. Do you know anybody like that? You've probably met people like that, right? Who are like, oh, I can't put my writing on the internet. People will steal it. Leaving Massachusetts. Joel says his goodbyes to Bill, and Bill says he doesn't give a fuck. But he does give Joel a rubber hose to siphon gas with. And then we hit the road. Road trip! So I guess that's a pretty good place to end a chapter. We've left Boston. We're moving on to arguably the most ill-advised part of the game. There's a lot in Pittsburgh that I like, but if you had to remove a part, that's probably the part. Like, it's very, well, we'll get into it, you know? But it's a little ham-fisted how that whole situation arises. I think it's safe to say that the first half of The Last of Us is not as good as the second half, but, you know, the less good half of the greatest goddamn game of all fucking time is pretty fucking good. So, thank you for listening. My name has been Keith McNally. You can find a copy of this book at keithcourage.com. Hope you enjoy. If so, please spread the word. Thank you very much. Adios.